The biggest problem with underestimating a threat today isn't what you see on the surface. It's not the obvious competitor or the loud critic. It's that quiet hum you dismiss, the one that doesn't fit your neat little box. Think about it. You see a new phone, looks clunky, maybe a bit heavy in your hand, and you instantly write it off. Too slow, you think. Too old school. But what if that clunky design hides a processing power that crushes everything else? What if that weight is pure, unadulterated capability? This isn't just about gadgets or even about a rival company. This is about a deeper, more insidious fear. The fear of being wrong when everyone expects you to be right. The fear of missing a crucial shift because your pride got in the way. And I'm going to show you exactly how this played out, how it created a catastrophic blind spot that cost an entire war machine dearly, and how it applies to your world right now. You'll see the proof of this mechanism in action, not just in history books, but in the echoes that still resonate today. So picture this. It's the early 1940s, a dimly lit Abwehr bunker somewhere in Germany. The air is thick with stale tobacco smoke, and the low hum of a Telefunken radio crackles in the background. Officers huddle, their faces grim, but then a dismissive chuckle breaks the tension. They're analyzing Allied intelligence reports, specifically a new American fighter plane, the P-47 Thunderbolt. The point is simple. Initial perception can blind you to true power. These German spies, these seasoned analysts, had a single overriding thought. They looked at the P-47's early specifications, its sheer size, its robust frame. Too heavy, they'd say, waving a hand. A flying brick, no threat to our nimble Focke-Wulfs or Messerschmitts. They filed their reports, confident, even arrogant. Their intelligence passed up the chain, painted a picture of a clumsy, easily outmaneuvered opponent. They laughed. They literally scoffed at what they saw. Does that sound familiar? Dismissing something because it doesn't fit your preconceived notion of what good should look like. You might do the same thing with a new idea at work or a different approach to a problem. You glance at it. It seems awkward, maybe too complex, and you push it aside. You don't dig deeper. You don't test it. You just assume it won't work. The micro-proof here? The P-47 was heavy. It was robust. But that wasn't a weakness. That was its secret strength. That weight meant armor. That robust frame meant it could take a beating and keep flying. And those wings, seemingly thick, housed a devastating secret. 8 50 caliber machine guns. They saw the weight, they missed the firepower. So you have a choice. You continue to rely on your first gut impression, dismissing anything that feels too heavy or too clunky. Or you test the mechanism now, pushing past initial judgment to uncover the real capability. Because the quiet hum they ignored, the one they laughed at, was about to become a roar. If you want to see exactly how this seemingly insignificant detail became the downfall of an entire air force, how this mechanism of underestimation shattered their reports and their morale, then you need to stick around. This isn't just a historical footnote. This is a pattern interrupt for your own thinking. Think about the last time you dismissed an idea, a person, or even a tool, just because it didn't look sleek or conventional. What did you miss? What opportunity did you let slip by, all because of an initial arrogant underestimation? The German high command made that mistake, big time. Their spies laughed, and their pilots paid the price. We're talking about a human cost, etched in the faces of grieving families. If you want to see this mechanism, this dangerous blind spot exposed in its rawest form, how those 8.50 cals silenced those confident reports, then subscribe now. I'll open the full test of this principle for you right here, right now. You'll understand why challenging your first impression isn't just a good idea, it's a matter of survival. And the next piece of this story, the moment the laughter died, is coming up. The laughter died with the first patrols over Europe. You see, those German spies, sitting in their bunker, they had data, they had blueprints, but they didn't have the sky. They hadn't felt the thunder. And that's where the real story begins. The point is, raw specs don't tell the whole truth. Think about a boxer. You see him. He's bulky, maybe a little slower on his feet than the sleek, agile guy. You dismiss him. Too heavy, you think. Easy target. But what if that bulk means he can take a punch? And what if his slower movement hides a knockout blow that lands every single time? That was the P-47, the jug, as the American pilots called it. Repara nisso un segundo. Allied pilots, flying the P-47 for the first time, they felt it, the weight, the sheer mass. But they also felt its power, its climb rate, its dive speed, the way it could absorb damage and keep going. This wasn't a sleek, elegant fighter. This was a brute, a flying tank, armed to the teeth. And the German pilots, those who first encountered them, quickly learned this brutal truth. Their initial reports back to the Abwehr, they started sounding very different from the dismissive chuckles. The micro-proof here? Early dogfights. A Messerschmitt 109, agile, fast, would get on a P-47's tail. They'd pepper it with cannon fire. And the P-47 would just keep flying. Smoke, maybe a hole or two, but it wouldn't fall apart. It would dive, gain speed, and then turn the tables. This was a shock. A pattern interrupt in the very air. The German pilots, trained to expect fragility, found an unbreakable wall. You're facing a choice right now. Do you continue to judge based on superficial appearances, on what should be true? Or do you adjust your perception based on undeniable, real-world performance? Because the jug wasn't just surviving, it was fighting back. And this is where those 50 caliber machine guns enter the picture. 8 of them, not 2, not 4, 8. Each one spitting out over 1,000 rounds a minute. That's a wall of lead, a solid destructive force that simply tore through anything it touched. German pilots, once confident in their nimble aircraft, suddenly found themselves in a nightmare. They'd dive on a P-47, thinking it was an easy kill, only to be met with a hail of fire so intense, so devastating, it shredded their planes in seconds. Olha o detalhe que ninguém te contou. German fighters were designed for quick, precise kills. A burst, a hit, then disengage. But the P-47 didn't play by those rules. It could sustain a longer attack, pour out more lead for longer. It wasn't about finesse. It was about overwhelming force. Imagine the street fight. You're trying to land a quick, clean jab. Your opponent, the one you dismissed as slow, just absorbs it, then hits you with a sledgehammer. That's the difference. This unexpected resilience, combined with unmatched firepower, was the first real crack in the German intelligence. Their reports, once full of confident scorn, started to carry a note of alarm. The flying brick was turning into a flying fortress, a deadly predator. Volume of fire from those 50 cals didn't just damage planes. It demoralized pilots. It changed the entire dynamic of air combat. This virada, this shift in perception is critical. It wasn't just about the plane. It was about the human element. The arrogance of the initial assessment, the dismissal of something new because it didn't fit the mold. That's what failed. Not the data, but the interpretation. Not the facts, but the filter. And this is exactly what happens in your own world when you dismiss a clunky solution because it doesn't look modern or sleek. If this virada, this sudden shift in understanding, has clicked something for you, leave a like. It helps me know I'm hitting the right notes. You see, The initial assessment was a psychological reframe in reverse. They took a strength, robustness, heavy armament, and framed it as a weakness. Too heavy. This mental shortcut, this cognitive bias, was their undoing. It led them to believe their agile planes were superior, when in fact, they were simply vulnerable to a different kind of threat. The next step changes the game completely, because the laughter turning to alarm was just the beginning. The real cost, the true impact of this intelligence failure, was about to unfold. You're going to see how this underestimation cascaded, not just into losing dogfights, but into a strategic nightmare that crippled an entire war effort. The silent reports of those 50 cals were about to become the loudest truth. This isn't just history. This is about the ever-present danger of underestimating the quiet hum that eventually becomes a roar. What other flying bricks are we dismissing, even now, simply because they don't fit our preconceived notions? The answer to that question will shock you. You continue to rely on comfortable assumptions, or you prepare for the next undeniable proof of this mechanism in action. Because the consequences weren't abstract. They were etched in the faces of grieving families. The human cost. It wasn't just metal twisting in the sky. It was the empty chair at dinner. The telegrams no one wanted to deliver. German air superiority, once a symbol of their power, began to erode. And it started with that initial, confident laughter in a bunker. You see, for the Luftwaffe, their tactics were honed for agile, fast dogfights. Their Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs were built for precision, for quick strikes. That was their playbook, their whole identity. But the P-47, the Jug, didn't fit that playbook. It broke the rules. It refused to die. Here's the shock of reality, the first big turn. Their common tactic simply failed. You can't outmaneuver a brick wall that shoots back with 8 machine guns. Imagine trying to dance around a tank. That's what German pilots were asked to do. Their agility, their finesse, was met with brute force. They'd engage, expecting a quick kill, only to find themselves absorbed, then overwhelmed. This is the point where the old ways break. The established wisdom crumbles. Your brilliant strategy, the one everyone praised, suddenly hits a wall it wasn't designed for. Does that sound familiar? When your go-to solution just stops working? German pilots, the best of the best, found their skills rendered almost irrelevant in certain encounters. Their training, their experience, their very understanding of air combat was challenged. They'd dive, fire, and watch their rounds bounce off, or simply fail to bring the P-47 down. Then the Jug would turn, bring those 8.50 calibers to bear, and the German plane would simply disintegrate. It wasn't a fair fight. It was a brutal lesson. The microproof? The dwindling numbers, not just of planes, but of experienced pilots, the ones who knew the skies, who had survived dozens of engagements. They were the hardest to replace. Each P-47 kill wasn't just a plane lost. It was institutional knowledge, combat wisdom, gone. And the replacement pilots? They were thrown into a meat grinder, facing a threat their instructors had dismissed. Repara nisu un segundo. What happens when your core assumption about your adversary is fundamentally wrong? When your entire strategy is built on a lie, a comfortable delusion? You lose, slowly, painfully. You lose your best people. You lose your edge. The German command, relying on those early dismissive intelligence reports, had failed to adapt. They believed their own propaganda, their own initial arrogance. This isn't just about a war. This is about your blind spots. What established tactic are you clinging to? What flying brick are you dismissing in your own field? The one that could actually change everything if you just stopped laughing and started looking. Me diz teu maior travão nos comentários. What's the biggest obstacle, the flying brick you're currently dismissing or struggling against? I read them, and I use them to bring you the exact step-by-step solutions you need. The point is this: the P-47 wasn't just a plane. It was a pattern interrupt in the very fabric of air warfare. It forced a brutal reevaluation. The Germans had designed their planes for specific roles, for a specific kind of fight. The P-47 broke that mold. It was a heavy fighter, yes, but it could also dive like a brick, gaining immense speed, then pull up and fight. It could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and still have enough fuel and firepower to engage. This was a mechanism of disruption. The assumption was fast and light equals superior. The proof was heavy and robust with overwhelming firepower equals survival and dominance. And the cost of ignoring that proof was astronomical. It led to a slow, agonizing loss of air superiority. The skies over Europe began to shift. The pendulum swung. Do you continue to operate under the old, comfortable assumptions, hoping your agility will win out? Or do you embrace the uncomfortable truth, the powerful mechanism of brute force and resilience, even if it looks clunky at first? Think about it. This isn't just about planes. It's about how you approach every challenge. The intelligence officers, the ones who laughed, eventually had to confront the truth. Their confident reports were being silenced, not by enemy propaganda, but by the undeniable reality of combat. The sound of 850 calibers was a far more persuasive argument than any intelligence brief. And this shift, this painful realization, started to chip away at the very foundation of the German war machine. The next piece of this puzzle reveals how this tactical failure became a strategic disaster and how it directly impacts your decisions today. The strategic disaster wasn't just a matter of losing planes. It was a hemorrhaging of talent. The Luftwaffe, once the spearhead of the Blitzkrieg, found itself bleeding experienced pilots faster than it could train new ones. Each time a P-47, the Jug, tore through a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf, it wasn't just metal twisting, it was a pilot. Perhaps one with 100 missions, hundreds of hours of combat wisdom, gone. That knowledge, that irreplaceable skill, vanished in a burst of 50 caliber fire. Au ponto é, you can't replace institutional memory overnight. Imagine your best team members, the ones who know all the hidden shortcuts, all the unwritten rules. Now imagine them gone, one by one, because your established system couldn't handle a new, unexpected threat. That's what happened to the Germans. Their pilots were facing a machine they'd been told was inferior, and it was systematically dismantling their air force. The micro-proof? The average combat life expectancy of a German pilot plummeted. It wasn't just bad luck. It was the P-47, relentless, unyielding, a flying tank that refused to break. The very resilience they had scoffed at became their undoing. Their intelligence reports, once so confident, now relayed tales of aircraft returning riddled with holes. Pilots shaken, describing the sheer volume of fire they faced. The laughter had died, replaced by a cold, hard fear. Você continua a operar com a equipe de elite que você tem, esperando que a experiência vença? Ou você muda sua estratégia para proteger esse ativo insubstituível, reconhecendo que novo inimigo joga por regras diferentes? The mechanism that reorganized everything was simple, yet devastatingly effective. The P-47 shifted air combat from a game of finesse to a war of attrition. German planes were built for surgical strikes, for dogfighting ballet. The P-47 was a brawler. It didn't dance, it endured. It didn't tap, it hammered. This brute force approach, combined with its ability to absorb incredible damage and return fire with those 850 cals, meant that every engagement became a test of endurance the Germans were not designed to win. Olha o detalhe que ninguém te contou. The P-47 could take a direct hit from a 20mm cannon, the kind that would tear a wing off a Messerschmitt, and often keep flying. Think about that. Your opponent hits you with their best shot, and you just shrug it off, then turn around and unleash hell. That wasn't just a plane. That was a psychological weapon. It broke the spirit as much as it broke the airframes. This mechanism, this sheer unyielding resilience, coupled with overwhelming firepower, forced the German High Command into an impossible dilemma. Do they commit their dwindling, experienced pilots to frontal engagements against this indestructible force? Or do they try to avoid it, leaving their ground troops and strategic targets vulnerable? Every option was a losing one, because the P-47 had fundamentally changed the rules of engagement. This isn't just about history. This is about the simple mechanism that reorganizes your entire strategy when a clunky new competitor enters the field, one that doesn't play by your established rules. It forces you to adapt or perish. Manda isso para quem ainda tá preso nas táticas antigas. Pode poupar ano de alguém. The truth is, the P-47's ascendancy wasn't just about its technical superiority. It was about the human cost of that initial arrogant underestimation. The very pilots who once scoffed at the jug found themselves outmatched, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. Their own confident reports, once dismissive, were now being silenced by the sheer unyielding firepower of those 8.50 caliber machine guns. The consequences weren't abstract. They were etched in the faces of grieving families, in the dwindling numbers of experienced Luftwaffe pilots. The slow, agonizing loss of air superiority crippled the German war machine. Imagine a football team, used to a fast-paced passing game, suddenly facing an opponent that just runs the ball straight through their line, every single play, never fumbling, never stopping. That's the P-47. It wasn't elegant, it was effective. It was the ultimate pattern interrupt. This mechanism of brute force and resilience was something the German intelligence had completely missed, blinded by their own preconceptions of what a good fighter should be. They valued agility. The P-47 delivered unstoppable power, and the gap between those two perceptions created a chasm of strategic failure that widened with every passing day. The initial question of, who saw what nobody saw, finds its answer in the pilots who survived and the intelligence officers who, eventually, had to confront the truth. The next piece of this puzzle shows how this intelligence failure wasn't just a mistake, but a prophecy of their ultimate defeat. The intelligence officers, those who once laughed, were now scrambling. Their initial reports, filled with derision, had been brutally overwritten by the grim reality of combat. The sound of 8.50 calibers wasn't just silencing planes, it was silencing confidence. This wasn't just a tactical failure, it was becoming a strategic disaster, a slow-motion prophecy of their ultimate defeat playing out in the skies. You see, air superiority isn't just about winning dogfights. It's about control. It's about protecting your assets. It's about denying the enemy access. And as the P-47s, those flying bricks, began to dominate, the Allied bombers, the B-17s, the B-24s, could operate with far greater impunity. Think about it. Imagine trying to run a business when your supply lines are constantly being cut, your factories bombed, your morale shattered by constant threats from above. That's what Germany faced. The point is, a single underestimated threat can unravel your entire operational fabric. The German war machine relied on its industrial output, on its ability to move troops and supplies. But with P-47s clearing the way for wave after wave of bombers, those vital arteries were severed. Bridges fell, factories crumbled, fuel depots exploded. The skies, once a proud domain, became a gauntlet. Repara nisso segundo. The strategic implications were staggering. It wasn't just about losing individual pilots. It was about losing the ability to wage war effectively. The initial arrogance of the Abwehr, dismissing the Jug as too heavy, too clumsy, had created a cascading failure. They hadn't just misjudged a plane, they had misjudged the future of air combat itself. They were still fighting a war of agility, while the Allies, with the P-47, had shifted to a war of relentless, overwhelming force. This is where the human cost becomes unbearable, doesn't it? It's not just a statistic. It's the families in Berlin, in Hamburg, watching their cities burn, knowing that the planes overhead faced little resistance. It's the soldiers on the ground, looking up, seeing their own air force outmatched, outnumbered, outgunned. The confidence, the bravado, it all started to drain away. So you have a choice. Do you continue to fight with an outdated playbook, hoping your old tactics will somehow prevail against a new, brutal reality? Or do you recognize the mechanism at play, the shift from finesse to attrition, and adapt your entire strategy, even if it means abandoning comfortable assumptions? Because the Jug wasn't just winning battles, it was winning the war. The mechanism was simple, yet devastating. The P-47, with its incredible durability and 850 caliber machine guns, made every engagement a costly proposition for the Luftwaffe. German pilots, even if they managed to damage a P-47, often expended so much ammunition or took so much damage themselves that the victory was Pyrrhic. They were bleeding resources, both human and material, at an unsustainable rate. This wasn't just about losing, it was about being systematically worn down. Olha o detalle que ninguém te contou. The P-47 could absorb hits that would instantly down any other fighter. It often returned to base, looking like Swiss cheese, but still flying. This psychological impact on German pilots was immense. They were fighting a ghost, a machine that refused to die. It broke their spirit. It made them hesitate. And hesitation in a dogfight is fatal. This simple mechanism, unyielding resilience, combined with overwhelming firepower, reorganized the entire air war. It forced the German command to make impossible choices. Do you send your dwindling, experienced pilots to try and stop the bombers, knowing they'll face these flying tanks? Or do you save them, leaving the heart of your nation exposed? It was a lose-lose scenario, born from a single, arrogant miscalculation. If you want to see this brutal mechanism, this shift from finesse to pure, overwhelming force, exposed in its rawest form, how it shattered an entire air force and paved the way for defeat, then subscribe now. I'll open the full demonstration of this principle for you, showing you exactly how adaptability isn't just a buzzword, but a matter of survival, whether you're in a cockpit over Europe or navigating the complex challenges of today. The principles are transferable. Always question initial assumptions. Understand the true capabilities of your adversaries, and never ever let pride dictate your assessment of a threat. The P-47, once a laughingstock, became a symbol of their most profound intelligence failure. But the echoes of that failure, the lessons it offers about the human element in warfare, still resonate today. What other flying bricks are we dismissing even now, simply because they don't fit our preconceived notions? The answer to that question will change how you see everything. The next step reveals how this tactical horror became a strategic blueprint for victory. The intelligence officers, those who once laughed, were now scrambling. Their initial reports, filled with derision, had been brutally overwritten by the grim reality of combat. The sound of 850 calibers wasn't just silencing planes, it was silencing confidence. This wasn't just a tactical failure, it was becoming a strategic disaster, a slow-motion prophecy of their ultimate defeat playing out in the skies. You see, air superiority isn't just about winning dogfights, it's about control. It's about protecting your assets. It's about denying the enemy access. And as the P-47s, those flying bricks, began to dominate, the Allied bombers, the B-17s, the B-24s, could operate with far greater impunity. Think about it. Imagine trying to run a business when your supply lines are constantly being cut, your factories bombed, your morale shattered by constant threats from above. That's what Germany faced. The point is, a single underestimated threat can unravel your entire operational fabric. The German war machine relied on its industrial output, on its ability to move troops and supplies. But with P-47s clearing the way for wave after wave of bombers, those vital arteries were severed. Bridges fell, factories crumbled, fuel depots exploded. The skies, once a proud domain, became a gauntlet. Repara nisso segundo. The strategic implications were staggering. It wasn't just about losing individual pilots. It was about losing the ability to wage war effectively. The initial arrogance of the Abwehr, dismissing the Jug as too heavy, too clumsy, had created a cascading failure. They hadn't just misjudged a plane, they had misjudged the future of air combat itself. They were still fighting a war of agility, while the Allies with the P-47 had shifted to a war of relentless, overwhelming force. This is where the human cost becomes unbearable, doesn't it? It's not just a statistic. It's the families in Berlin, in Hamburg, watching their cities burn, knowing that the planes overhead faced little resistance. It's the soldiers on the ground, looking up, seeing their own air force outmatched, outnumbered, outgunned. The confidence, the bravado, it all started to drain away. So you have a choice. Do you continue to fight with an outdated playbook, hoping your old tactics will somehow prevail against a new, brutal reality? Or do you recognize the mechanism at play, the shift from finesse to attrition, and adapt your entire strategy, even if it means abandoning comfortable assumptions? Because the Jug wasn't just winning battles, it was winning the war. The mechanism was simple, yet devastating. The P-47, with its incredible durability and 8 bullets, 50 caliber machine guns, made every engagement a costly proposition for the Luftwaffe. German pilots, even if they managed to damage a P-47, often expended so much ammunition or took so much damage themselves that the victory was Pyrrhic. They were bleeding resources, both human and material, at an unsustainable rate. This wasn't just about losing, it was about being systematically worn down. Olha o detalhe que ninguém te contou. The P-47 could absorb hits that would instantly down any other fighter. It often returned to base looking like Swiss cheese, but still flying. This psychological impact on German pilots was immense. They were fighting a ghost, a machine that refused to die. It broke their spirit. It made them hesitate, and hesitation in a dogfight is fatal. This simple mechanism, unyielding resilience combined with overwhelming firepower, reorganized the entire air war. It forced the German command to make impossible choices. Do you send your dwindling, experienced pilots to try and stop the bombers, knowing they'll face these flying tanks? Or do you save them, leaving the heart of your nation exposed? It was a lose-lose scenario, born from a single, arrogant miscalculation. If you want to see this brutal mechanism, this shift from finesse to pure, overwhelming force, exposed in its rawest form, how it shattered an entire air force and paved the way for defeat, then subscribe now. I'll open the full demonstration of this principle for you, showing you exactly how adaptability isn't just a buzzword, but a matter of survival. Whether you're in a cockpit over Europe or navigating the complex challenges of today, the principles are transferable. Always question initial assumptions. Understand the true capabilities of your adversaries, and never ever let pride dictate your assessment of a threat. The P-47, once a laughingstock, became a symbol of their most profound intelligence failure. But the echoes of that failure, the lessons it offers about the human element in warfare, still resonate today. What other flying bricks are we dismissing, even now, simply because they don't fit our preconceived notions? The answer to that question will change how you see everything. The next step reveals how this tactical horror became a strategic blueprint for victory. Consider this mini-experiment. Imagine if, from day one, the German Abwehr had taken the P-47 seriously. What if they'd seen past the too heavy label and recognized the immense potential of its durability and firepower? They would have invested differently. They would have trained their pilots to avoid head-on engagements, to target specific vulnerabilities, or even to develop their own heavy fighters. The entire trajectory of the air war could have shifted. But they didn't. They laughed. Me diz teu maior travão nos comentários. What's the biggest flying brick you're currently dismissing, either in your work or personal life? The one everyone else laughs at, but you suspect holds a hidden power? I read them, and I use them to bring you the exact step-by-step solutions you need. The loop of initial dismissal closed with the undeniable reality of air supremacy shifting, irrevocably, to the Allies. The intelligence officers, once so confident, had to confront the truth. Their hubris had cost them the skies. And the next piece of this story shows the final crushing blow. The intelligence officers, once so confident, had to confront the truth. Their hubris had cost them the skies. And the next piece of this story shows the final crushing blow. This wasn't just about losing battles. It was about losing the war itself, one agonizing minute at a time, high above Europe. The P-47, the flying brick, had become the instrument of an irreversible strategic shift. O ponto é, when you dismiss a threat, you don't just miscalculate, you create a void. For Germany, that void was air superiority. They couldn't protect their cities from relentless bombing raids. They couldn't shield their panzer divisions from strafing attacks. The vast network of factories, railways, and fuel depots, the very lifeblood of their war machine, lay exposed, vulnerable. Segura essa. Imagine a factory worker in Essen trying to make steel for tanks. Every day, the air raid sirens wail. He looks up, not seeing the familiar silhouette of a Messerschmitt coming to defend, but the distant, growing drone of B-17s, escorted by those P-47s. That's a pattern interrupt, isn't it? That's the psychological toll. The belief in victory, in their own air force, crumbled with every bomb that fell. The microproof, German industrial output, once a marvel, began to falter. It wasn't just physical damage. It was the constant disruption, the loss of morale, the endless diversion of resources to air defense. They were building flak guns instead of tanks, scrambling fighters that were outmatched, and watching their best pilots vanish. The quiet hum of Allied engines became the soundtrack of their defeat. Você continua a crer na invencibilidade do seu sistema, mesmo quando a realidade te mostra o contrário? Ou você aceita a verdade brutal e reorganiza tudo antes que seja tarde demais? The mechanism that sealed their fate was the P-47's role as a long-range escort fighter. German intelligence had scoffed at its range, believing it too heavy to accompany bombers deep into Reich territory. They thought their interior defenses, their agile interceptors, would be safe. They were wrong. The P-47, with its drop tanks, could fly hundreds of miles, protect the bombers, and then turn its 8.50 calibers on anything that dared to challenge it. Olha o detalhe que ninguém te contou. German pilots, after fighting their way through waves of P-47s to reach the bombers, often found themselves low on fuel and ammunition, only to be met by more P-47s on the way back. It was a meat grinder. A jug wasn't just defending. It was hunting. It turned the skies into a gauntlet, a shooting gallery where German fighters were the targets. This mechanism, this relentless deep strike air superiority, created an impossible dilemma. The Germans had to choose: defend the bombers and lose precious pilots and planes, or let the bombers through and watch their industrial heartland burn. Every choice led to the same outcome: the systematic dismantling of their ability to wage war. Their reports, once full of derision, now whispered of a terrifying, inescapable reality. This isn't just about planes. This is about how a single, underestimated flying brick can completely redefine the battlefield, forcing your entire strategy to crumble. It's about the truth that sometimes the most effective solution isn't the most elegant, but the most uncompromising. The strategic consequences were staggering. The German war machine, built on speed and offensive power, was now forced into a desperate defensive posture. They couldn't secure their borders, couldn't move supplies freely, couldn't even guarantee the safety of their own capital. The skies, once a symbol of their dominance, became a constant, terrifying reminder of their failure. The initial arrogance had given way to a chilling recognition of an unwinnable fight. Entre nos, the stories from surviving German pilots were harrowing. They described the futility, the sheer volume of fire, the feeling of hitting a P-47 only for it to keep coming. It was like punching a brick wall. That kind of experience erodes confidence, destroys morale, and ultimately breaks the will to fight. The laughter of the Abwehr had been replaced by the silent, grim reports of exhausted, defeated men. The point is, the P-47 didn't just win dogfights, it won the war of attrition, the war of nerves, and ultimately, the strategic war. It forced the German high command to confront a reality they had refused to see. Their air force was being systematically destroyed by a plane they had mocked. The final, crushing blow was the realization that the skies were lost, irrevocably. This shift wasn't just a military defeat. It was a psychological one. It demonstrated that arrogance, when confronted with an adaptable and resilient adversary, leads to catastrophic miscalculations. The P-47 proved that brute force, applied relentlessly, could overcome perceived elegance. The next step reveals how this tactical horror became a strategic blueprint for victory, and what it means for you right now. The initial assessment: too heavy, they said. They laughed. But those laughs, those confident reports from the Telefunken bunker, they were silenced, not by a single shot, but by the relentless, overwhelming mechanism of 8.50 caliber machine guns, firing from a plane they called a flying brick. The P-47 didn't just win dogfights, it systematically dismantled an air force, a nation's morale, and a global war effort. It proved that arrogance, filtered through institutional dogma, is a fatal flaw. What does this mean for you now? 3 simple steps. First, cut the noise. Question every initial assumption, especially the ones that feel too comfortable. Second, apply the mechanism. Understand the true, often brutal, capabilities of any challenge, not just what it looks like. And third, measure for a week. Test your new perspective, adapt relentlessly, because the battlefield, whether in the sky or in your life, is always shifting. We close today 2 loops: the tragic, costly silence of those German reports and the undeniable proof that underestimation breeds disaster. But we leave one loop open. What other flying bricks are you dismissing right now, simply because they don't fit your preconceived notions? The answer to that question could change everything. I'll show you this principle running in real time, the modern equivalent of the P-47's lesson, in the next video. Click the playlist right now and come with me.